Is the easy stuff done? The stock's had a great run. You've reorganized the business into 4 divisions. The market broadly has been on board so far. But does the tough bit now come? You've got to deal with the expenses. You've got to figure out exactly what the wealth division and how it's going to function to become this kind of global leader.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. A lot has been done. In fact, I think we're very proud about the speed, about the scope of what we've been able to achieve in really a very short time. It's been less than a year, and I think no one would argue that we probably have done more transformation, more change at HSBC, potentially in its history. And so we're very, very proud of what we've achieved. I would love to say the easy things have always been done. There's always tougher things to do, in particular in a ever-changing environment. But we have done it quite a lot, in particular around the organizational aspects of the change.
So what does year 2 bring?
Year 2, I think, in particular for my business, brings much more focus on simplification, much more focus on really just efficiencies. And that by meaning not just cost efficiencies, but just being a better bank, being able to respond quicker, to be more agile. All the things that really takes a long time.
Do you think some of that's already in the price in terms of the share price performance thus far?
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it is certainly in there. I think you mentioned the cost. You know, as George has said many times, we will achieve the cost savings that we have set out to achieve. We're very confident as a management team will do that, and so that's fully in train right now. But clearly, you know, we have to respond to the environment. Clearly, we have to respond to all of the policy changes that are coming out from various places. So, yes, I think we have done a lot. I think we will do more to do. I think it will be focused on really making the bank just a better bank, operating more efficiently. I think probably the stock market understands it. In fact, it's a 22-year high is what it is. So it's an extraordinary, I think, positive response from the market. But we clearly will always have more to do.
HSBC has exited a series of businesses lately to focus in on that kind of restructuring that you've just outlined and the cost efficiencies. As the youth would say, there might be a little bit of FOMO there. Do you think you're missing out on this big moment for Europe, this big moment for the UK, as people look to diversify away from the States?
No, and I think you're referring to what the investment bank, the changes there, because we have actually had a lot more disposals of various types. Not really, no. And I think the reason being is that we were never a bulge bracket investment bank. And that is something to everybody understand. We were a good investment bank, in particular where we have scale and relevance, Asia and the Middle East being those regions. And if you look at how we really perform and what our value added, it is really the cross-border nature of our business. And it is really in regions which we have an undeniable leadership position, Asia and the Middle East being those 2 regions. And thirdly, those are the regions for the future. Those are the regions that will grow. Think about 10 years from now, it's not going to be the same. And, you know, I grew up in investment banking. I understand exactly what everybody's talking about. 60% of the fees are in the United States. And we are in the United States in our debt business, by the way. We've just reduced our M&A and equity business there. So we can still utilize the value of the capital markets, which are the largest capital markets in the world. Obviously, very important to be there. So we have a lot of deals that go to the U.S. capital markets. That's great. But the future is really Asia and the Middle East.
So critics of that argument would suggest that the experience of 5 years ago during COVID, when Asian markets were largely closed, and a lot of the investors that were very bullish on Asia kind of learned their lesson and really pulled out from that kind of exposure. It's taken a while to even dip a toe back in. Why, not necessarily in COVID, but in another circumstance, should people increase their exposure to a region that has historically not always been the most sure bet?
Because I think that's an enormous amount of wealth creation occurring right now in Asia, whether it be India or China. I think Hong Kong will become even a more important capital markets or center for capital markets around the world. I think that you see a huge amount of capital and trade flows going between the Middle East and Asia. You have 2 regions that have an enormous amount of capital, and they're exchanging capital back and forth.
But is any of it coming from the States or from Europe into
Much less.
Asia?
Well, still there will always be. Yeah, I mean, if you look at where American companies are expanding, they're expanding in those 2 regions. If you look at where European companies are expanding, they're not expanding in Europe. I think the U.S. is largely done. They're expanding in those 2 regions. The interesting thing, however, is the amount of money going from the Middle East into Asia and vice versa. I think we have underestimated that is a significant and I think permanent trend, and that's where we're there is to capture those flows as you have a reordering of the world's capital flows.
Michael, I want to talk about staffing. You talked about some of the headwinds floating around the world. Diplomatically put, many of them come from the White House. We've had this change on the H-1B visa. how much does that affect you? Because we know it affects tech heavily. It
Yeah.
also affects finance.
It does. Our operations in the United States are about 6,000 people, so relatively it's much less than if you're Microsoft or Google or some of the big tech companies or some of our American competitors. We had a flurry of activity this weekend, like everyone else. I think it was unfortunate because the initial policy was unclear as to whether it was retroactive or prospective. They've now clarified that it is prospective, so that makes it much easier. I think it was going to be very disconcerting for a lot of people, in particular those holders of those visas who were traveling abroad.
But are you instructing staff to stay put? Do you think in the longer term you'll have more staff based, say, in Asia or in Europe?
Again, we don't have a huge amount of the H-1B visa holders. Yes, I think for all companies, to pay an extra $100,000 on top of everything else, it is going to change the way we look at staffing. I think for us, it's manageable. I think for maybe other financial services companies similarly. I think for tech companies, that is a much bigger issue.
Can I just come back to this question of the relationship between the Middle East and Asia and the changing kind of nature of global trade? Critty's just spent 3 weeks in DC, talks about de-dollarization, this kind of process that is unfolding, this concern that exists in the United States about that. Do you think that relationship is enduring? Do you think it's been created to a certain extent by the Trump administration? Are we seeing a reordering in the sort of tectonic plates of the world as a result of what is happening out of DC and forcing other people together?
Look, it's a very good question. The answer is I don't know, because I think the policy changes quite a lot. I think clearly if you're not going to have the dollar as the reserve currency, that forces a major reordering of the world's economic structure as we know it today. I think there is concern. I've talked to many investors, those in Asia and elsewhere, who are quite concerned as to what this means. There is no alternative. And that is the reality. There will not be an alternative for many, many years. And so tomorrow, if the U.S. dollar is not the reserve currency, what is? It's not the renminbi. It's not the euro. I mean, the actual relative change between currencies, reserve currencies, has not changed for the last 20 or 30 years. In order to have a significant change, I think it takes a long time to do. So if, however, there is a major policy change, there is, for instance, some discussion of taxing foreign holders of U.S. Treasuries, as an example, that would send a signal that, yes, I think you'll have a evolutionary change, just because of practical reality, you can't do it quickly. But that would introduce a significant amount of uncertainty in the world's economic order.
You talk about Asia and the Middle East becoming, to follow on Guy's question, this kind of new sphere of growth. Can it still hold the level of innovation, financial innovation that you still see from the States? I'll give you an example. In the private markets, for example, yes, they're expanding, but the driver of that financial market innovation, things like democratizing 401ks in terms of getting access to private markets, in terms of the IPOs, in terms of some of the structured products that are out there, it's still driven by the large-scale American players. Are you still seeing some of that innovation be done more organically from the Middle East or Asia, or is this about adopting what starts in the States?
Look, I think clearly from the financial perspective, the U.S. capital market is still the dominant capital markets. A lot of the financial innovation comes from the U.S., having been there for most of my career. So very well aware of that. However, I think you'll see, a very quick adoption of many of those type of changes into both the Middle East and in particular in Asia. I think it's not only, by the way, financial innovation. I think it's also industrial innovation, technology, which is coming out of places like China fast and furious. I mean, I was also in Silicon Valley the week before last. I was in Israel last week. I will go to China, and just to see all of that innovation is pretty extraordinary that's going on, and it's just not American innovation anymore. So I think that's one thing everyone should understand. Financially, yes, you certainly benefit in the United States by having the largest, most liquid financial markets, and you have some of the largest banks in the world, so that's very helpful as well. But I don't think that will be confined to the U.S., and I think more and more you'll see U.S. players focusing on places like Asia. We see a huge amount of that, the inflow of U.S. capital into Asia. They will bring technology with their capital as well.
What's HSBC doing in the private markets? Are you growing as fast as maybe some of your peers in the States?
Yeah,
what does that look like?
Part of our restructuring is to put all of our private credit activities in one place. It was not in one place before. So we're doing that as we speak. And that gets to your question about what are the things we're going to be doing going forward.
Yep.
It's what I call debottlenecking a lot of those issues. Every bank has this as a problem, by the way, is how do you respond to private credit, which is a new type of financing, which doesn't really necessarily fit with the conventional way banks have been structured.
Is there systemic risk in private credit?
We looked at it very closely. In fact, we've had lots of discussion internally and even with our board. There will clearly be always systemic risk. The question is how much leverage there is. What would be the trigger for that systemic risk is something that we look at very quickly, or very closely.
Michael, Guy started by asking you about the restructuring. We're a year in.
I figured he would.
How's morale?
Look, morale's fine. I mean, and no one likes to go through restructuring. And the reason we've moved as quickly as we have, which I must say again is as quick as we could possibly do it, is very, very sensitive to morale issues, very sensitive to being distracted. That is very distracting. I think we're in a position now to say that first phase, that organizational change phase, is coming to an end. And that's probably the most important thing. Not that we don't have more to do, as Guy asked before. We will continue to, I think, improve the place, make it easier for our bankers and our traders and our salespeople. That's what we're going to focus on going forward. That's rewiring and replumbing. That, by its very nature, is not quick. And I just told a group the other day, bear with us. We know what we're doing, but it will take a while. But we're doing, I think, some very interesting things around AI, doing very interesting digitization that will make their jobs easier, but also plays through right to the clients. That is really where we see a lot of value going forward.